Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It is your favorite disembodied voice of an anthropomorphic root vegetable, your dear old Papa Yam. Last week, we talked about 10 ultra-reliable motorcycles, so today we must explore the other side of that coin and discuss some of the most unreliable motorcycles known to man. Before we turn this rock over and start looking for worms, let me give you a quick update on our illustrious R1M giveaway that's ending soon.
I'm gonna be completely honest, this is one of my favorite 1000cc motorcycles of all time. This is a Yamaha R1M, and it is simply the coolest Japanese leader bike that you could spend your hard-earned dollars on. Head over to yamanube.co. We're doing this one as a giveaway bike for a limited time at the end of 2023 to wrap up and celebrate an amazing year that we've had on our store. Get entered to win by purchasing anything you'd like and get your chances locked and loaded to win this incredible Yamaha R1M.
The first entry on our list today is not just one specific motorcycle, but yet a swath of motorcycles known for their predilection of unreliability. In 1998, Harley replaced the Evo engine with the twin cam engine in their Dyna lineup. The Dyna was the successor to the FXR model, which was designed to be a sort of hybridization of their small and maneuverable Sportster models and the large, fully dressed, as Harley dads like to say, touring models. The Dyna, which has long been acclaimed as being a real bike, and the steed of choice for leather-clad wannabe tough guys or former PacSun managers in California who ride in Vans slip-ons and Dickie shorts, was like most motorcycles from Harley-Davidson, not without its problems. And look, I know it's easy to bully Harley-Davidsons to essentially do the equivalent of throw rotten fruit at them and boo them off the stage during the high school talent show performance, but listen, it's not unwarranted. All sensible motorcyclists who spend more time actually riding than buying branded merch and drinking Mick Ultra with their old ladies at the worst bar in America can attest to that. We all know the general statements about how they leak oil or rattle themselves to death, which is truly just the tip of the iceberg. The company was at one point owned by a bowling pin manufacturer who allocated more resources to slapping the Bar and Shield logo on everything from golf carts to baby formula, instead of building motorcycles that were designed to last longer than a season or two. So what can you really expect? But long since the AMF years, Harley-Davidson has had their continued run-ins with the reliability police. While the twin-cam engine was meant to be an advancement from the previous Evos, the early production years were rife with problems. These bikes from the late 90s and early 2000s were known to have cam chain tensioner issues as well as crank runout. That's why if you ever see an overpriced early 2000s Dyna for sale, the seller is quick to advertise that the cam chain tensioners have been replaced. This problem was eventually bred out of the twin-cam engine design in 2006 when the engine saw the use of hydraulic lifters. These bikes were also the first Harley-Davidson models to receive 6P transmissions, which were known for failure in the early 2000s. Even if all these failing parts were replaced, it would still likely leak oil and have the relentless Dyna death wobble. While there are still quite a bit of early 2000s Dynas on the roads, most have been completely gone over and rebuilt. It's kind of the opposite of a Sportster, where many see untimely demise due to extensive rider modification. A Sportster left relatively stock and maintained well can run a very long time, yet the early twin-cam models are kind of the opposite, where they needed extensive modification to be truly roadworthy for many seasons. And even when they were roadworthy, they still suck. Sorry. People love to complain that Italian motorcycles are unreliable. Granted, many early models were originally pieced together from leftover plane and bomb parts from World War II, and then assembled in a horse carriage by chain-smoking pizza chefs with PTSD. But the true threat to motorcycle reliability is domestic. American-made bikes have really been the silent killer, yet their advocates are often the loudest of any group, their primal hoots and hollers suppressing the cries of bleeding V-twins from sea to shining sea. Of course, as we just discussed, Harley-Davidson have never been the benchmark for reliability, but neither was Indian prior to being resurrected by Polaris in 2013. But there has only been one motorcycle so wretched that the designer himself publicly dropped one into a car shredder. The Buell Blast was made by Buell Motorcycles from 2000 until 2009 and produced primarily in Harley-Davidson's Screamin' Eagle motorcycle clown college training courses, where instead of teaching you riding fundamentals like they do in the MSF, they teach you how to lose custody of your children and and commit income tax fraud. We're really punching down on the Harley folks today. Sorry. Interestingly enough, the Buell Blast was lauded as being an incredibly impractical for complete novices during the rider course. In fact, there were dozens of instances and multiple lawsuits filed by riders who crashed into walls during the course specifically due to the ineptitude of the motorcycle, which had too much torque, a choppy clutch friction zone, and brakes that were far too aggressive and bitey than needed, leading to inevitable lockups. The Buell Blast was truly an impractical motorcycle to be used in a training course, and it often blasted itself into walls. It used a 492cc single-cylinder engine that was essentially just the front jug of a Sportster engine with the rear cylinder being lopped off. It made 34 horsepower and 30 foot-pounds of torque. Buell Simps will advocate for the Blast, claiming it was a misunderstood bike, but they're just dumb. The Blast was a crude, clunky, rickety, and overperformed in some areas and drastically underperformed in others. The bodywork was literally made out of golf ball plastic to protect it in the instance of a crash. While these bikes were designed for beginner riders and meant to be easy to maintain, they fall short in so many ways of that original intent, so it's long gone. Speaking of American motorcycles, the only thing worse than a bike built by a bunch of Midwestern roughnecks in between their guarantee and union breaks is a motorcycle that is branded as being American but actually built by teenagers in the basement of a dusty Chinese factory. By now, we should all know not to buy Chinese bikes from Amazon. But little did you know there are a few companies out there that are selling what are essentially boxed Chinese bikes, but first rebranding them and slapping on a few pieces of bodywork. I'm talking about brands like Cleveland Cycle Work. In some ways, even Janus Motorcycle falls into this category due to their predilection for ancient Chinese engine clones. In Europe, there are companies like Sinus or Mutt Cycles that operate similarly, but Cleveland Cycle Works, for instance, sell or sold, as it seems, because they're not selling bikes currently due to a quote-unquote hiatus, small displacement retro-styled bikes that are just rebadged Chinese motorcycles. The engines are old Suzuki or Honda clones, and everything else is made of cheap, crappy materials. There is no dealer network, no aftermarket parts support, no customer knowledge, and a build quality worse than a soapbox derby car built by a bunch of Boy Scouts in 1955. People who have managed to avoid all negative press about these bikes and ended up purchasing one have reported egregious errors in regards to build quality, like a brake caliper just yeeting itself off of the wheel under normal use. And it's not just rebranded Chinese bikes that are unreliable. A lot of the Chinese motorcycles that make no attempt to hide their Chinese manufacturing origins are also bad, like Hyosung, Lifan, and Lexmoto. People who end up with these bikes, many of which are relatively popular overseas, essentially say that they spend the entirety of their ownership chasing down problems and struggling to find parts, and then ultimately sell them for a massive loss and then just end up buying a Japanese bike that they should have gotten in the first place. But in the midst of changing global manufacturing landscapes, you can't entirely discredit every motorcycle with a Chinese lineage or ownership. CF Moto's doing really well, the new Benellis aren't too bad, and bikes from Moto Morini have recently become available in the US, and they are by no means the mass-produced, rebranded, small displacement crap Chinese bikes that riders need to be aware of. These are actually pretty decent. Since we're on the topic of Chinese motorcycles, we have to talk about KTM. KTM has kind of become the poster child for motorcycles from Austria by way of China since their partnership with CF Moto. But ironically, it's not even their most recent collaborations you should be wary of. Well, let's be honest, you should probably be always slightly wary when buying a KTM. Even the most devout KTM simps are never one to praise the brand for their top-tier reliability, but instead for the riding experience they provide. That sort of comes with the territory. You want a KTM because you want a KTM. Whether it's a Super Duke or a Supermoto or an adventure bike or a top-tier, god-tier enduro bike, you just have to anticipate that you may be one of the unlucky riders who gets a bike whose starter just stops working, or whose cruise control just shuts off every time they use the turn signal, or whose piston ring decides to leave the chat while a couple hundred miles from home. While most motorcycles from KTM are well-built and exciting machines, there's always the caveat of potential quirks or Austrian gremlins. With a new KTM, these issues would be addressed via the manufacturer warranty, that is, unless your warranty expires while you wait 6 months for a starter relay to come in. Again, I say much of this in jest. The KTMs that you should truly be skeptical of are the ones made prior to 2018 or the first generation Duke 790 entirely. The Duke 790 was known to have some production problems initially that was stopped in 2020. Other than the 790, the early Duke and RC390 models had problems with leaking fluids and overheating as well. Prior to 2018, KTM was still relatively new to street bikes, coming from the motocross world, where engines are meant to be high-strung with incredibly short service intervals. They didn't exactly seamlessly adapt to street bikes, where engines necessitate a little bit more lax service requirements. As KTM continues to grow and fine-tune their street bike lineup, their bikes are becoming more reliable, though the stigma is hard to forget. Head gasket, anyone? We can't talk about reliability or lack thereof without talking about Ducati. And similarly to other European manufacturers, Ducati's reliability has improved significantly year after year. While they don't churn out bikes in the quantities that the Big Four does, they're not building just one-off bikes anymore. Although racing is definitely at the forefront of Ducati's legacy, they are now owned by the VW and Audi groups, so they're getting that volume in. As a consequence of that, Ducati has never offered much in the way of a true beginner bike, and when they tried with the Scrambler 62, they ultimately fell very short. The Scrambler 62 is not unreliable in the way that you might expect, suffering from unforeseen catastrophic failures, but it is instead unreliable in the way that it was entirely economically backward bike to own. The 62 was aimed at beginner riders using a diminutive 400cc air-cooled L-twin engine, but at the time, the bike still cost $8,000 brand new, which, yeah, is expensive for a beginner bike, but it's not unheard of for aspiring Ducatistas to pay a bit more to get that Ducati badging on their motorcycle. But this bike is realized to be a terrible buy when you comprehend the cost of ownership for a motorcycle that makes 40 horsepower. The Scrambler 62 had incredibly short service intervals, requiring valve service every 6,000 miles. These services, even on 2-valve air-cooled engines, are known to cost upwards of $2,000. So not only would the Scrambler 62 cost more than any other beginner bike on the market, after 12,000 miles, you would have already paid 50% of the purchase price in service costs. That's the thing, no one is staying on a Scrambler 62 for 12,000 miles, probably not even 6,000. So before it gets there, they'll sell it to some naive beginner who will unknowingly get slammed with a massive service bill in addition to whatever they paid for it. There are still plenty of Scrambler 62s out there for sale, usually going for $5 or $6 grand, but don't be fooled. The amount of motorcycle you get is not worth what it will cost you in the long run, or the short run for that matter. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. As always, it is much appreciated. If you subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, be sure to head over to yamanoob.co to learn more about how you can get entered to win our Yamaha R1M. Oh, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all those who celebrate. I think this video is scheduled to air on or around the 25th, so Happy Holidays from the future. Fact. Heels were first invented in Persia in the 10th century, and they were originally designed for men. Wealthy men wore them to give an additional height, and they rode on horseback. Goodbye.
Keep watching Yami Noob.